And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather is showing gale force winds and a big area of rain here spreading eastward to the Alaska Peninsula, northward to the Pribilofs, snow and blowing snow St. Lawrence Island, with lighter winds there to the north and southeast across southern Alaska. Snow in the interior here, central interior, and not too bad for the southeast coast as this system drops off to the southeast. And then a pretty good day there, light winds for the Panhandle. Light winds, variably cloudy skies to clear conditions, southern Alaska, up under that high there on the North Slope and Brooks Range area. Still some light snow here on the east side and the eastern Arctic coast with some blowing snow. And the blizzard warning should end by 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon for St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, gale force winds and rain here for the southern Bering Sea. And also in advance of this front, pushing a little farther to the east in the Alaska Peninsula. And the next day, that front weakens as it drives eastward and northward here, bringing more increasing wind with rain and snow into St. Lawrence Island, the southwest coast, and small craft advisories to maybe some gale force winds for the Alaska Peninsula, but rain spreading into Kodiak Island. Looking good over the interior from Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, all the way up to the Arctic coast. Chance of showers now along the coast of the Panhandle. Coastal water forecast down that way. East winds tomorrow pretty light at 10 knots central coast, south at 10, and east-southeast at 10 on the north coast. Not too bad on the inside waters as well. North winds 15 knots in those areas. And then for the day on Saturday, small craft advisories, north winds 20 knots for Lynn Canal, north 20 knots for Stevens Passage, northwest at 15 for Clarence Strait. And winds still relatively light here out along the coast, east-southeast on the north coast at 10 knots there, and southeast 10 to 15 knots for the south coast, Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast, and the Barren Islands. Light variable winds tomorrow at 10 knots, Cook Inlet, northeast at 10 to 15 knots, all the way down to Kamishak Bay. And then for Saturday, Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, east at 20 knots, northeast 15 for the western North Gulf Coast, Cook Inlet, northeast winds 10 to 20 knots. And for the eastern North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, winds stay light and variable. Light variable conditions for Kodiak Island tomorrow as well. Otherwise, gale warnings here for the Alaska Peninsula, east-southeasterlies 30 to 40 knots, southeast 25 for Bristol Bay. And then for the day on Saturday, gale force winds now in Bristol Bay, east 35 knots, and east-southeasterlies 30 to 35 knots for the peninsula, and Kodiak Island, 25-knot winds from an east direction or southeasterly. And for the eastern Aleutians, definitely high-end gales there, east 45 knots forecast tomorrow, a little lighter but not much, east at 40 knots for Adak and Atka. And the western Aleutians, we've got small craft advisories for east and northeast winds. Small craft advisories continue for 30-knot winds from varying directions over the western Aleutians. South at 25 knots for Adak and Atka, southeast 25 to 30 knots for the Fox Islands. And for the southwest coast, east winds tomorrow 15 to 25 knots, strongest south of Nunivak Island. Gale force easterlies 35 for the Pribilofs, east at 30 St. Matthew Island, east at 20 for St. Lawrence Island. And then for Saturday, brisk wind advisories, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta Coast, gale warnings for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, southeast at 40 knots, southeast at 30 knots for the Pribilofs, east winds 40 knots for St. Matthew Island. Up to the north, eastern Boulevard Sea Coast tomorrow, brisk wind advisories, west winds 25 to 30 knots, west at 20 on the central coast, down to 15 knots for the west side, western coast there in the Chuck CC, north winds 15 to 25 knots. And then for Saturday, we've got east to northeast winds at 15 to 20 knots for the Chuck CC, east at 15 for the western Arctic coast, central on the east side here, 10-knot winds from anywhere from west to east on the direction